At the far reaches of the known world, there lived a civilization of legendary proportions. Ruled by a powerful queen, this civilization of warriors was known throughout all of Greece for their ferocity, strength, and savageness. This civilization would raid smaller villages and kidnap their inhabitants, taking their resources as needed, and set up cities that have grown and still last to this day. This is not a civilization of Greek myth, but rather one of mythological proportions. This was the civilization of the Amazons, warrior women whose exploits echoed throughout Greek myth. Thank you to my paid supporters for helping to choose this episode of Behind the Servants. If you would like to help decide who we cover next, consider joining my Patreon, my YouTube membership, or my Twitch subscription for polls when they come up. Thank you for your support, and back to the video. No proper Greek epic would be complete without at least mentioning these legendary warriors, an entire civilization of women whose might could match any man's ferocity and fervor. These warriors appear across the mythological archives as either trustworthy companions or frightening adversaries. Unsurprisingly, in Fate, we have two different Amazons, both of whom were present in popular legends, Penthesilea and Hippolyta. We will cover each of their exploits here, but today I also want to focus on who the Amazons were. Perhaps I'm the odd man out with this, as, despite being a steadfast fan of Greek myth since my childhood, I never really questioned who the Amazons were. I've always just kind of had an image in my head that they existed in forest huts and abducted men, but admittedly that's likely because I used to run an Amazoness deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where that was the vibe. So, who were the Amazons? The word Amazon itself doesn't have a definitive meaning, though some scholars have suggested it could have derived from a Greek word meaning manless without husband, or the Iranian word Hamazon, meaning warrior. Ancient sources put their mystical kingdom on the outskirts of the known world to the Greeks, but today it's believed their main city was Themyscira and Anatolia. But individual towns and areas set up by the Amazons may have reached as far as Russia. In fact, the ancient author Suetonius made the claim that not only did the Amazons once live in Asia, they ruled large swaths of it. Ancient scholars, however, believe them to be centered in a number of different places, like Thermodon or Pontus. This civilization was known for its warlike behavior, its master of archery, horseback riding, and strategy. Contrary to popular belief, there is no evidence to suggest the Amazons cut off one of their breasts and burnt it to aid them in archery, as most ancient depictions of them show them with both breasts or one covered by a guard. To somewhat highlight the exact level of might that these warriors brought to the battlefield, we need only to look to two different examples of their exploits. During the Trojan War, the Amazon Penthesilea and her troops were strong enough to turn the tide alone. We'll talk more about that later. But perhaps more impressively is the raid conducted by Myrina, an Amazon queen, on the Atlantean city of Cerne. She and her party managed to raise the entire city before making off with their bounty. For reference, it should be recalled that the Atlanteans were said to possess advanced technology and knowledge. This is like having a ragtag group of Warhammer orcs destroying a city of tech priests with relative ease. While any actual history of the Amazons is unknown, we do have a loose recounting of their timelines and actions through myths. They were a known adversary in the world during the writing of the Iliad by Homer around the 8th century BCE. They supposedly at one point beefed with Dionysus for burning down one of his temples, and then teaming up with him to fight people in India. An Amazon queen named Thalestris approached Alexander the Great and offered to bear his child. This was done in hopes that by combining both of their incredibly strong genes, they could make a new, even stronger group of warriors. Though this is believed to be a trumped-up version of a Scythian king offering Alexander his daughter. But around the 1st century BCE, they had supposedly all vanished. According to the scholar Strabo, they went deeper into the mountains and lived alongside a different all-male tribe, and once a year the group would come together to have kids, and after they were born, splitting them by gender once again. But what about the named Amazons? For the purposes of this video, we will be focusing on just the two that we have in Fate as of right now, Penthesilea and Hippolyta. Let's start with Penth. Penthesilea's historicity is dubious at best, as well as her actual personality, actions, and capabilities. This is because she is not originally from the Iliad as many people believe. She is from a different story called the Aethiopus, which is also a telling of the Trojan War among other stories. Now you may be asking yourself, Klidge, how different could it possibly be? To which I will remind everyone that Ovid, one of the most popular sources for most Greek myths, completely altered them in a way that changes figures' origins, desires, and deeds. A prime example people love to point out to me is that Ovid's telling of the Medusa myth is the one that integrates Poseidon being a horrendous creature, which leads to Medusa's transformation. So, while I want to believe that Homer's telling of the Aethiopus is accurate, I cannot discount that changes may have been made. And while I would love to cite the Aethiopus for this video, it is completely lost to time, so we only have the tales of the tales. So, let's dig into what Homer had to say about Penthesilea. Penth was an Amazonian queen from Thrace, who was also a daughter to the war god Ares. Amazons, as a race, were believed to be descendants of this war deity, and through their barbaric and warlike ways, they appealed to their patron. Not much is known about Penthesilia's childhood or upbringing, but we see glimpses into her life as well as her motivations for joining the Trojan War briefly. Penthesilia's sister was Hippolyta, and the two were extremely close. However, while hunting, Penth accidentally killed Hippolyta with a spear. The action of killing her sister filled her with an extreme grief, and she wished to take her own life. Likely, this is the scene that we see in her final ascension, where she contemplatively sits by a river in the woods with cold, dead eyes. However, to take one's own life would be shameful, and so Penth elected to die in battle. To this end, she joined the Trojan conflict. She, much like the rest of the Amazons, was aware of this fight but had chosen not to intervene, as it was not a matter for her or the Amazons to address. However, when Hector was killed, she saw an opportunity to join the side of the Trojans and march with a contingency of Amazons to the field of battle. Part of the reason she may have chosen the side of Troy is because the Trojan king Priam at one point had fought the Amazons as a sign of strength, and so a bond forged by warfare existed between the two factions. So fierce and strong was she and her Amazons that they nearly held the battlefield by themselves for an entire day. This ferocity attracted the attention of the main Greek warrior of the Iliad, Achilles. Now, the connection between these two does have a tendency to vary depending on versions of the story. In all, though, Achilles is drawn to Penthesilea and engages her in combat. Though she fights bravely and ferociously, Achilles gains the upper hand and lands a killing blow. Supposedly, Achilles was also drawn in by her beauty, falling in love with her right before the kill, which compelled him to catch her dying body. In Fate's telling, he whispers to her that she is beautiful, which is nothing short of an insult in this instance. Imagine, if you will, that you're a warrior who managed to go toe-to-toe with the greatest fighter of the enemy side, and after you lose, he doesn't acknowledge you for your combat prowess, but for your looks. I'd be eternally pissed too. This isn't even going into the one telling of the story which says that Penth did manage to kill Achilles, but Zeus said nope and brought him back to life. After this, another Greek, a soldier named Thersites, makes fun of Achilles' treatment of the body, which leads to Achilles punching him so hard that it kills him. What happens next is also dependent on the telling. In some instances, the Greeks take Penth's body and drag it behind a chariot and then toss it into a river, but Achilles gets the body and buries it properly. In another, Achilles engages in necrophilia with the body. In others still, after doing that, the body produces a son for Achilles. Regardless, this marked the end of Penthesilea, who was robbed of her warrior's death in the Fate version, but maybe less so in her historical version. While she is a bit of a footnote character today in the grander scale of the Trojan War, she did serve as a model for warrior women throughout antiquity. In fact, she was so well known that she was listed among the woman 9 worthies. The 9 worthies are 9 great leaders and warriors from across the known world, revered for their cunning, strength, and prowess. The men include the pagans, Hector, Alexander the Great, and Julius Caesar, the Jews, Joshua, David, and Judah Maccabee, and the Christians, Arthur, Charlemagne, and Godfrey of Bouillon. By the way, that's their naming convention, not mine. The women one is much less concrete, but for nearly every list, Penthesilea is mentioned. Other notable names in FGO that occasionally appear are Hippolyta, Boudica, and Semiramis. A note to future klidge, I need to keep this list in mind for a video. Regardless, her name in antiquity preceded itself as that of a fierce warrior. Now to her much more tragic sister, Hippolyta. Hippolyta is such a historical oddball. She appears in various myths and legends across the scope of the ancient world, but ultimately always as a tragic foil for some other hero. But let's talk about it. Hippolyta, much like Penth, is the daughter of Ares and Otrera, the original Amazonian. She was the queen of the Amazons before Penth, and as such was given her father's war belt, which features prominently in her Fate design. Her name actually means she who unleashes horses, which is likely the reason she appears as a rider despite not really being shown with horses in her myth. We're going to work through the various mythological appearances of Hippolyta quickly to kind of get a feeling for her life. Starting with her most famous appearance, and the one that Fate draws from the most, the tale of Heracles' 12 labors. Herc was sent to get the belt of Hippolyta for Admete as his 9th labor. When he arrived, Hippolyta, as well as the other Amazons, were impressed with him, and so she gave him the belt without issue. In fact, the two actually hit it off rather well, and in some versions of the myth, went back to Herc's ship to have sex and produce a strong heir. This must have pissed off Hera, the fickle goddess pulling the strings behind Herc's back, and so she became directly involved. She took on the guise of an Amazon and began whispering rumors that Herc had actually come to abduct their queen, and that they should stop him. Riled into a tizzy by this, the Amazonians attacked Herc's ship. Though they fought bravely, the Amazons couldn't get through the Nemean lion hide and ended up being massacred by Herc. In some tellings, it's Herc who ends up having to kill Hippolyta, and in others, she is accidentally killed by the Amazons. Regardless, she doesn't survive this encounter, and Herc ultimately leaves in grief. Next is how she appears in the myth of Theseus, and also where the narrative becomes really dumb. In this myth, Theseus had actually gotten along with Herc to get the girdle, and they either abduct Hippolyta and she is given to Theseus as a spoil of war, or she falls in love with Theseus and leaves willingly with him, betraying her sisters. To further complicate this, in some tellings, this Amazon that goes along isn't even Hippolyta, but a different Amazon named Antiope. Regardless, rather than being killed by Herc, she is taken to Athens by Theseus and made queen. This leads to the Attic War, which involved the Amazons attempting to raid Athens to get Hippolyta back from Theseus. In the versions where this happens, Hippolyta is accidentally killed during the fighting and the Amazons are driven away. In a different telling, Theseus, ever the charmer, decides he wants to fumble the hot tomboy Amazonian in favor of some broad named Phaedra, who, by the way, tries to sleep with her son later on down the line. Check out my Theseus vid for that one. This rightfully enrages Hippolyta, who then gathers the Amazons to sack Athens and is killed in the process. Sometimes by Theseus, sometimes by Herc, sometimes by the other Amazons, sometimes even by Penthesilea leading her to go and die in Troy. Regardless, Hippolyta never gets a happy ending. Except once. While not explicitly a work of mythology, Hippolyta is a fixture in the Shakespearean play A Midsummer's Night Dream. Here, she is engaged to Theseus, and the two wish to be married, which is what draws all the other characters in the play, Oberon and Titania included, to Greece. Here, the two are marrying for both love and also political reasons. According to Plutarch, which is where Shakespeare seems to have drawn his inspirations, Hippolyta and Theseus came to an agreement to end a war between Athens and the Amazons by getting married to one another, having found a fondness for each other. In the play, she doesn't really do too much, not really being the subject of the trickery of Oberon and Puck like the other members, but this is the one time where we actually get to see her get a happy ending, at least kind of. But with that, that is all of the Amazons currently in Chaldea in the books. There are certainly more Amazons to come, and I would quite frankly be shocked if they didn't add others. So if there's one that you think would fit right in, leave a comment to let me know who you think it is. If you enjoyed this video, you may also enjoy the other Behind the Servants videos in this playlist. If you want to support me directly, like, comment, and subscribe, or buy some Hippolyta coffee with my code, klidge. I get all my research done by being overly caffeinated, and so I'm happy to be partnered with Hippolyta Coffee. Support them, and you support me as well. Thank you all so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, but for now, keep your chin up, peace.